Metaphor Refantazio is the new game from Studio Zero, the people behind a lot of the Persona and Shin Megami Tensei games, and I'm here to recommend it, because I think that whether you're a fan, which you probably already picked the game up, or if you're new to the series or have been hesitant to jump into other games by the studio before, this is the one that you should probably start with, and I'll tell you why. By the way, hi, I'm Mug. If you're new here, welcome, and if you're not new here, welcome back. The haircut has been delayed because I have been sick for 4 days and also something bit me. I don't know what, but I'm very afraid it might have been a spider. Also, in disclosure terms, thank you Sega for providing the review key. Now, I have not finished Metaphor because it's a huge game, and if I do manage to finish it this year, I will do a proper analysis, and I've been recording just in case. The point of this video is after 30 hours, I want to recommend it, especially towards people who might be on the fence about it. Just in case you're a Shin Megami Tensei or Persona fan and you didn't immediately buy the game, I can tell you that you will very much like it and you should probably go buy it. But if you're new to the series, or if you've dabbled in it before and you're just not sure, that is primarily who this video is for, because I think Metaphor does a lot of really smart things that are going to appeal to people that normally haven't enjoyed these games or have been hesitant to jump into them. Now, as a brief setup, Metaphor is a party-based, turn-based Japanese role-playing game set in a completely fantastical world. Think something around the typical fantasy archetypes where you would have things like different races like elves and dwarves, but in this case they are their own reinterpretations with their own political conflicts and their own reasons for being and distinctive features. The story follows the protagonist, which is voiced and you are meant to embody. You have a lot of different decisions to make throughout the story, not many of which have been of severe consequence so far, but in very Persona-style fashion, it does affect your social links and your relationships with other party members and other characters. But this is a very shonen-style story, very grand, starting from nothing and then building up to the biggest conflict imaginable in this world. It really does have a bit of a shonen spin to formulas that Atlus has played with before. In this case, you have a cast of villains over a series of different stages. There are very concrete moments in the story where you are meant to face down each of the characters, at least so far. But this time, it's all wrapped up in a much grander scheme right from the start. You know what the goal is, you know what you're headed towards, you know what the ultimate battle is going to be, and you're building up to it over time as you collect your party, deepen your bonds, and go on more and more adventures, which will take you traveling across an entire land and experiencing a whole bunch of stuff. And that's really where I think a lot of the strength in Metaphor lies, in the fact that while it does retain a lot of those Shin Megami Tensei and Persona staples, a lot of the systems that people have come to expect and that many people love, it also sands down a lot of it and refines it. And it makes it much more approachable to newcomers without, in my opinion, feeling like it sacrifices much of what those systems had that were good. That's because it refocuses and restructures a lot of how those games work, fusing together some of the best parts of Persona and Shin Megami Tensei, all into a brand new system in its combat that I think functions very well as the driving force of a lot of the gameplay. And hopefully, if you are familiar with Shin Megami Tensei or Persona, that is enough to sell you on the game. But just in case you're new, and just because I think it's interesting to talk about, let's dive a bit deeper. One of the biggest departures for me is the general structure of the story. Knowing who your big bad is right from the start, and the path to them being kind of very clear, and your goals very set in stone as you keep marching forward, help in creating a much better pacing for the game that I think is going to help people get invested in it much sooner than you would maybe in a game like Persona 5 that I think takes quite a while to really ramp up and get started. The fact that your home base in this game isn't a city or a town and is instead your transportation vehicle means that the constant progression is also seen physically as you move throughout the land. Instead of it being something like in Persona the palaces plus Memento and something like that if you want to use Persona 5, here you're just constantly changing the landscape. The dungeons and the types of enemies make sense for the area that they're in this fantastical world. And that just furthers that feeling of progression. Combat here, in my opinion, is the best combat system we've seen, which I really like Persona 5 Royal's combat system, and I very, very much enjoy Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance's combat system. But I think what's here is just superb. I really enjoy fights in this game because while they do still have that puzzle-like structure of the Atlas RPGs before Metaphor, that being the press turn system or the exploitation of weaknesses to keep making your turn longer and longer and really set up these more elaborate combos. Everything that surrounds that is basically a Final Fantasy style job system where every single one of your party members can level independently from their character level different jobs and progress through different job trees with different requirements for unlocking new ones, and an inheritance system where skills from any other job that they have unlocked can be put onto any other job, leading to crazy combinations either for just flexibility and comfort for a certain weakness exploitation during a dungeon or in a specific area, or for crazier, bigger combos utilizing some of the stronger passives that you can find later down in the tree. So that means you can range from giving your tank the ability to heal the entire party, or giving a physical bruiser a bit of magic so that they can exploit weaknesses during a dungeon, all the way to bigger passives like increasing your MP reserves or increasing the damage dealt with basic attacks and applying them to very different jobs that normally you wouldn't expect would exploit them. But here there's also a much more in-depth gear system compared to some of the other games, meaning that there's some specific weapons and armor sets that are going to help you further define what is a lot more buildcraft, in my opinion, in this game, a lot more traditional buildcraft compared to the Persona and Shin Megami Tensei series, which focus a lot more on fusion. It's just a very different feeling and a very different progression that feels a lot more immediate, at least compared to what those other Atlas RPGs have been before. There's this sense of feedback as you level up every single archetype, and you always have something very clear to look for that doesn't feel gated by which monsters you encounter or what fusions you have available. And in a weird way, it doesn't feel as gated by grinding, because as you keep progressing, leveling up some of those basic jobs is basically trivial, leading to a lot of creativity and expression being at the heart of the combat system. It also, in my opinion, as, for example, a person who absolutely loves Fire Emblem and considers it one of my favorite series of all time, I've always been a big fan of attaching that sort of progression directly to a party member, which in Shin Megami Tensei I felt wasn't ever that strong, especially considering that most of the time in SMT you just have an assortment of different monsters. And in Persona, I think that attachment was always a lot stronger in the social relationships that you have with your party members, more than it was through the feats that you accomplished in gameplay or grinding them up just experience-wise, right? It was always a lot more important the passives and the benefits that you obtained for them through the act of talking with them. Where here, that more traditional JRPG grind of building up each of your party members and turning them into the ideal version of themselves for combat feels much more rewarding and had me feeling much more attached to them. And the social stuff isn't gone, so overall, I just enjoyed my time with my party from much sooner here than I did in something like Persona. Now, the game does want you to be switching all of your characters' jobs out quite a lot depending on what you're facing, but there are still obviously better builds for each of those things. And if you're willing to put in the time to grind and to really plan out where you want a character to end up at, you're going to feel those advantages in combat with the list of different things that you can do and how you can exploit, and you will feel very strong and therefore feel very rewarded for either that grinding or those smart decisions in that build craft. And the cherry on top for the combat side of the game is the real-time elements that now exist, which again is just this common theme of sanding off some of the elements and making everything just smoother. Similar to how in Persona 5 you can sneak up on enemies, or in Shin Megami Tensei how you can strike an enemy to get the upper hand, Here, if an enemy is of a considerably lower level than you, you will just outright defeat them and still get drops and rewards and XP out in the overworld through that defeat. But if an enemy is of the same strength or higher, there is a very rudimentary combat system that goes on here where you have a basic combo that changes depending on your weapon, which is decided by your job at that moment, and a basic dodge. And you engage in these little combats. Some of them can last up to maybe 20-30 seconds even, as you try and stun the enemy to get the upper hand when you begin the turn-based combat. But it just makes it a lot more fun to actually have to pull off your combo and dodge the enemy's attacks and position correctly in order to deal damage and reach there, and makes it overall a lot more rewarding than I walked up to them and pressed a button. This also means that you might find yourself side questing in some of the extra dungeons here and be over leveled for them, and they turn into mini dynasty warriors as you run down hallways and absolutely destroy a lot of enemies. Which, by the way, if you're taking advantage of your passives, for example, the merchant's passive, to have every single defeated enemy drop quite a lot of money, you can farm these dungeons to get a lot of gold, which again, just providing an option for somebody who doesn't want to worry as much about how much gold you have, you can grind that there very easily on your way without wasting time. MP has always been the biggest restriction on how much you can really engage in combat in these games, and very early on it's addressed with the mage job, which has a very early passive that allows you to recover MP after fighting, and you will find more items and passives and skills that allow you to recover MP much earlier on here than you would in other Atlas games, kind of easing that stress and allowing you to tailor the experience a bit more to what you want. And I really don't feel like that takes away from the core structure of the game or the benefits that are now tried and true from how these games have worked for such a long time. And that sanding off is also present in the social aspects of the game. Similar to Persona, there is a calendar system. You have free time periods that you can use to either deepen your bonds with certain characters, to improve your social stats, a whole host of different things, including, of course, going side questing and going to do those missions in those dungeons. But where in Persona, I frequently felt like there was a lot of FOMO involved of not making the correct decisions, of following an ideal timeline to really maximize every bond and get everything done, where I could experience all of the stories of all of my friends and all of the characters in the game. Here, while I suspect that it's probably in reality very similar, it doesn't feel that way. It feels a lot more relaxed, like you are allowed to make mistakes and not be optimally efficient. A lot of the deadlines for a lot of things are much more relaxed and much more flexible, which means that you can take it a bit more on your own pace. And even if you are going to be punished for it, that punishment doesn't seem as apparent to the player early on, leading to it being more approachable and just an overall, let's say, smoother experience. The only real complaint I have with the game is that while I think the dungeons and their themes so far have been excellent, and I've pretty much not disliked anything that I've done, including side dungeons, it is true that the game doesn't have the same type of mobility in the dungeon design as Persona 5 Royal specifically, which added a lot more to how you navigated some of the dungeons there. Here it feels a lot more PS2 level design, just a lot of hallways and combat with some puzzles here or there, but it's much more streamlined in the way that you navigate it, and it also doesn't have that much more open, crazy exploration feel that the open world areas in Shin Megami Tensei 5V have. And it's just a different flavor, but I do miss some of the quirks from both Royal and Vengeance that are not present here, but it doesn't really detract enough for me to ever not really enjoy these dungeon designs and the themes and the enemies and the monsters. And of course, we can't forget, and it's a really important part of these games, I think that this completely new world, completely detached from the history of the franchise of these monsters. If there's a Jack Frost in this game, I have not seen him. Everything here is completely new. The lore, the settings, the races, the technology, everything about this world is from zero, and it is incredibly exciting. This is immediately one of my favorite fantasy worlds I've ever experienced, from the way that it deals with religion and a lot of the themes surrounding it, a lot of the social commentary that it has to place, and the way that it creates the titular metaphors in the game. but just the personality and the logic and the construction of this world and the reasons that it is the way it is, aesthetically, and the characters, all of it, to me just hit immediately from the first moment I ever saw this game, and playing it I can confirm that it's as excellent as I hoped it would be. These are some of my favorite party members in any JRPG. They're up there with Persona 5 and Dragon Quest XI for me. These are just incredibly well written, very well voiced, and the world is a joy to explore, and the theming, what it wants to say, is very powerful in just the right ways at just the right time. I am consistently surprised by the ability that this studio has. In the case of Persona 5, one of my favorite games of all time, not necessarily just for the game part of it, but because of what it meant to me at the moment that it came out, with how the world was and how I personally was. And I don't understand how Metaphor manages to have the same effect, but in my opinion, even stronger, with a lot of the biggest problems that we have today. It speaks to ideologies and politics and tribalism and inequality and justice. It speaks to the order of the world and the order of progress and how many different ways there are of viewing it and how violent those discussions can get in ways that, in this case, are much less subtle than previous works by the studio, but I think that's by design. It wants to be blunt because I think part of the whole topic here is the bluntness of some of these things in our life. And hopefully I can find the time not just to finish it, and I am recording a lot of this and taking down a lot of notes, but I would really like to speak further on not just the brilliance of a lot of the design that I've already mentioned that I think makes this game incredibly approachable, incredibly accessible if this is your first time delving into the studio's work, but just how profound a lot of what it has to say is, in my opinion, just on the very artistic merit of being able to recognize a lot of the problems in society so quickly as to tell a tale that I feel is really well crafted around those themes. All of this is to say that Metaphor Refantazio is a game that is an absolute joy to play, to be invested in its RPG systems, to progress your characters, and to enjoy the combat. It's an absolute joy to live in this world, to experience this adventure, to go on this massive JRPG adventure with these party members. It's a game that I continue to have trouble putting down as I keep working on other videos for the channel. It is one of the best games of 2024. It is very much headed in the direction of being my favorite game by this studio, which is a lot for me to say. It's not quite my game of the year yet, not because it's lacking in being one of the best things I've played in a long time, but because there's been quite a lot of great games this year that I'm also very excited to talk about, and that I'm sure will surprise many of you. Whether you're a Megami Tensei veteran or you've always been watching from the outside, I think that this is a great time to jump in. I don't think you'll regret it. I think that it'll capture you right from the start, and I think you will greatly enjoy your time in the world of Uchronia. And if you greatly enjoy your time watching through this video, is when you should hit the like button. If you want more from me, news, reviews like this one, retrospectives, and my video essays, make sure to subscribe. Most important of all, thank you so much for watching, especially all the way to the end of the video. I truly appreciate it. An extra special thanks to my patrons up on the $1 patron wall. It's called that way because there's only one tier, $1, but they support everything I do. There's been a lot of new patrons. Thank you so much. We're close to having to redesign this wall again, but it shows just how much many of you believe in what I do in the channel, even if it is, I guess, these more traditional reviews like this one. And as always, go out there, enjoy some video games. Today I would recommend Metaphor Refantazio as the game, and I will see you again very soon.